friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. Trevor, Shelley de Brauw and Laurent Schroeder-Lebec of Pelican return. We had them on a few years ago to discuss the band, and now they're back to discuss their brand new record, Flickering Resonance. As you all know, Everything Went Black is part of a larger group of content creators known as the Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse. Kicking things off every other Monday, we have Horror Wolf 666. Up next on Tuesdays, we've got Into the Necrosphere, the greatest extreme metal podcast in the land. Wednesday is a double shot Wednesday, if you will, where I have Everything Went Black, as well as Iblis Manifestations. Thursday is another double shot. Of course, it's Necro Thursday, where the Necromaniacs horror podcast comes at you, but also day one of Soul Knocks for all things macabre, sinister, occult. Friday, we've got Spitball Media, an irreverent pop culture podcast. Saturday is a day off. We're in spring. Go out, live your life, enjoy yourselves. Because on Sunday, Soul Knocks returns. Carl Hikara and I are continuing our Darkness Weaves collaboration between Everything Went Black and Soul Knocks, where we discuss the work of Carl Edward Wagner, a sword and sorcery, horror, and weird fiction author. If you enjoy the show, by all means, share it with your friends, tell people about it, give us star ratings, reviews, all that jazz on the various platforms. But if you really want to put your money where your mouth is, you can join the Everything Went Black Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get bonus material, which comes at you pretty much every week. For $5 a month, you get all the bonus material, plus early access to the regular platform shows. And for $25 a month, you can become a sponsor. Laurent, you look 10 years younger.
Just start with that. Well, I've been, I've been on a treatment. One day I was on Instagram and something came across my feed and it was like, just, take one of these red pills for a year. All these side effects will happen and then you'll magically be 10 years younger. And here we are. No, none of those things happen. I'm not sure. I think it might just be the youthful glow bulb that I have.
Filters. Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be the world we're going to be living in soon.
Yeah.
Is that everyone is virtually communicating through these filters. I like that. Very Black Mirror.
Yeah, oh God, yeah, that's what you're getting from me today. You're getting my avatar.
I'm planning on getting a full face tattoo of my face, but younger.
There you go. Interesting news. This episode is going to be coming out pretty much on the eve of the release of the brand new Pelican record and, Flickering Resonance. And so this is timely that we're having this conversation. And I'm looking forward to, I've heard the entire record and I got to say, once again, congratulations. I fully enjoyed it from start to finish. I have some of my favorite songs on here. And yeah, I'm happy to have a new Pelican record to look forward to. And you guys have had like a very long and storied career. So, congratulations on that.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Back when you started, did you think that you would still be doing the band this far into the future?
That's a really good question. I think back then I thought it was like, okay, this is the rest of life, just making music, and it didn't seem to have an end date, but then things really don't when you're, I guess, younger. It just seems like you just do things.
I feel like the era we came up in to, like, especially in like the punk hardcore sphere, bands would do like a 7-inch and maybe they would get to an album, and there would be the rare case where a band would have 2 albums, and then but no, bands didn't really last much longer than that, it felt like. So no, I would say the answer is probably no, but also like there's never like you know a a drop dead end that we had in sight. It was just sort of like the thing we were doing in living in the moment. And that moment just carried on.
Well, you touched on something interesting. Another point that though uh, I'm sure this term probably makes you uncomfortable, but like the whole like post rock, post metal, moniker that gets slapped on the bands. In the beginning, when you were starting the band, you weren't thinking in those terms. You mentioned like hardcore punk and sort of that world and that DIY like sort of ethic. And Pelican was part of that late '90s, early 2000s, Hydrahead sort of scene, which definitely was rooted in the punk and hardcore world, but was like in so many ways like progressing the whole genre into a different place. And I think bands that started up post Pelican and ISIS are don't have necessarily that perspective. So it's interesting to hear that your ideas about the band were like more consistent with something that might have been on like Ebullition or like early Revelation kind of thing. All right, we'll do a 7 inch and then we'll make a record and that's it. And that's the once we achieve those things, we just keep going. And I thought that it's just like an interesting time. I mean, myself, a little bit older than you guys, but basically coming from that same background, it's like kind of tripped out to think that that was like 30 years ago at some point.
Yeah, I was talking to Aaron, to Aaron Turner yesterday. For your listeners, that's Aaron Turner of many bands, and
I- I'm
also,
I think people that listen to this show know who Aaron Trevor is. He's been a guest on here before. So.
but he was, we were chiming in on the new Dead Guy song and how good it was, and we had got into like Kiss It Goodbye and some of the other like bands that were trying to take hardcore into a new direction, not like uh not as like by design, but like thoughtfully we're taking it to like new rhythmic and energetic kind of areas, and how Hydrahead was really an important label for that, this sort of the development of that like post-hardcore sound, not post-hardcore as we know it and talk about it as like a melodic thing, but more like where does hardcore shapeshift now? Does it, now that it's done the like the youth crew thing and the slightly metallic thing and the beatdown thing and like, the this and that, like how do you take that energy and that that interest in like the hardcore rudiments and turn it into something different that's like gleaning some influence from metal and maybe some influence from like psychedelic stuff and then a little black metal, and like there was no other label that would have been the label to do that. Like if you wanted to do that with your music, that was your goalpost, Hydrahead, And I think
Absolutely.
in a post Hydrahead world, there's certainly other labels that are carrying like a similar torch here and there, but there's none that's like as encapsulating of that whole sound. It really was like the best home um for us and the things that we were trying to do for sure for a while.
When I look back on that time, it was like it was interesting because of the commonality of what people might not on the surface see as the common denominator between a lot of the bands. Like for example, like we've all been on tour together. We talked about Judas Priest, Slayer, Minor Threat, like, but none of our music sounds like that. You know what I mean? And I think
Right.
that was kind of like the springboard for a lot of the bands. And Pelican is, in my opinion, was one of the sort of flagship bands, really, along with ISIS, to kind of mold that sound. You know what I mean? Of like having more freedom and to explore different textures in the music and work with longer form songs and kind of dive into that world as opposed to like fast, short, formulaic songs. And that sort of development, I feel like that's a once in a lifetime kind of thing because I think the perspective has changed where there are bands that are influenced by ISIS and Pelican and Cult of Luna and those bands that might not have that sort of idea that we all had back in the day.
I think, and I might just be speaking for myself, but we were just coming from it from a place of complete naivete. where it was like I knew that we had metal influence, but I never would have thought I didn't think that we were a metal band really until City of Echoes, our third album. And then at that point, we were on what people were calling a metal label, and we were playing shows with bands that people were calling metal bands. People were just calling us metal. And it was at that point that I was like, I guess we're a metal band. I don't know. And then also at that same time was when Village Voice ran a scathing article about poser metal, and we were one of the pegs.
Oh
It's
man.
like, I don't know. None of us, I never thought we weren't trying to be metal. We were just
Yeah,
like,
no.
the hardcore scene was just in a place at the time that we were coming up that like metal influence was prevalent, but it was also about, like Laurent said, where do we take hardcore next? What do we do with the sound? Like we all have this interest in what is heavy, but we're interested in finding different ways of expressing heaviness. And for us, I mean, a lot of that was pulling from more melodic influences too. And obviously, ISIS covered some of that territory as well. And, you know, the backbone for that was not only metal. I mean, we were all into like, I was super invested in pop punk and emo, and all that stuff played into our music as well. I mean, I remember Laurent showing me some of the early songs, early riffs from the Australasia album, and being like, "Oh man, I've been obsessed with Red House Painters lately. Like, I can see how I can do some of this Red House Painters guitar stuff on top of this, and it'll totally fit." And like, you know, that's maybe that is a poser metal thing
No,
because
no.
there's just like nothing metal about it, right? So
I hate when people use that word, poser or whatever. It's like, you know, it's like like to have that amount of hubris to
Yeah.
decree that someone's a poser
Yeah.
is like beyond, any kind of understanding that I have about things. I mean,
you know, it might have been hipster metal, but whatever
oh
it
God,
was like.
yeah. I just
You
think
know,
that like as far as like, sort of labeling bands as hipster this or that or poser this or that, it should just play out in the output of the band and what kind of longevity they have.
I
If
just
they're,
like
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm don't
it's
mean.
like it's like judging who's on the train depending on like which station you came in on. It's like, oh, you didn't board the train at like the right station, like so you don't get to be here. It's like you don't know what avenues people take to get to places. And certainly if you want to like co-opt a scene, there's like other scenes you can be doing that with. You could say that there's some bands that like sound more commercial or ended up developing like a larger following because they had some more accessible elements, or like maybe the music machine took better care of some bands than others, and they got bigger as a result. There's so many factors that go into why certain things blow up versus others, but the tribalism of judging someone being metal versus not, or like true punk or not, like I think some of that should have just kind of died a long time ago
Yeah, no, I
when
hope
you
I.
when you could get beat up for this or that, like at some point like that sort of stopped, and scenes really ended up needing to thrive on being more welcoming and inclusive to begin with, and that's where the fireside really uh was an appropriate place for so many different scenes, because it was like if you were rolling through, if you wanted a show, you weren't in a place to be like, well, we're only going to play on a three band bill that's bands where we share an aesthetic. It's like, you know, yeah, they weren't going to be like so disparate that like fan bases were going to clash, but there were certainly shows where you'd go like, yeah, whoever's watching this band is leaving after. And then whoever you came to see, it was like 20 of you or whatever, but the show has happened. And so maybe somebody walked away going like, actually, I think that's pretty cool. Like I might dig into that a little bit. Um, yeah, it was just a lot more cross proliferation.
Just a quick aside. Are you guys familiar with the band Galdsveerd? The dude from Gorgoroth has a band called Galdsveerd, right?
Oh,
I
the
don't think
new the
no,
new one,
no.
his like clean vocal
Yeah,
kind of black. Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a prime example of what you just hinted about, t touched on about where you get on the train. Like if you just started listening to black metal like 2 months ago, and you're like, oh yeah, this guy was in this band that you got to check out, and this is his new band. You might listen to it and be like, what's this? What is this? This is not black metal. However, this guy was a very instrumental part of that scene and one of the more like kind of, crucial members of that world, but without
Yeah.
having the history and, experience of listening through all the other stuff, you might have a completely different perspective on it. But I think that, keeping with that in mind, it's like the best fans, I think, are the ones who like listen to something with an open mind and then go back and explore, like especially a band who has like a big catalog like that, to see how things have started out and maybe changed and evolved over time. And that's like one of the coolest things about having a huge catalog like Pelican has, is where you can go back. There's a couple, we had Dallas in the band for a while, and
Yeah.
now you're back, and then you can go back to what 2001, I think, was the first record.
Right, and they
Yeah.
don't you'll hear similar things, but also you might be like, wow, this is a different band, but it's cool and it's interesting to see the progression. And then there's those people that have been around the entire time. I mean, there's got to be some out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the new record, okay, that's on a label that I'm not so familiar with, Run for Cover Records. Okay. And so how did that relationship come about?
Well, we were trying to figure out a new home for Pelican, and we kind of had a short list of labels we were interested in. Run for Cover is one that I knew because I used to work with Cloakroom in a professional capacity. My day job, I'm a publicist, and Tom from Run for Cover Run for Cover put out their first EP, and then Tom for Run for Cover was their manager for a while after that, still, even when they signed to Relapse and all that stuff. So I knew him through all that. Um, they were a label that kind of appealed to us because I think a lot of what we're talking about now, about like feeling like we had been pigeonholed as like a metal band, and realizing that what we do is a little bit more broad than that. We wanted to be on a label that would speak to kind of a different audience. And Run for Cover are sort of at the forefront of like what's really creative and interesting about what's going on with hardcore now, which is sort of like I feel like the younger generation has adopted a tendency that maybe has been with us for a long time, which is just reaching into lots of different genres and figuring out ways to move the art form forward. And we proposed it to Run for Cover, and they were immediately receptive. And our initial calls with them, they really seemed to grasp the band in a way that we also interpret ourselves. So it felt very natural right from the get. It was not lost on me that this, for us, I think this record feels sort of like, the first brick in a new wall that we're building, that we're kind of like, this is the first chapter of this era of the band. And signing to a hardcore band from I'm sorry, signing to a hardcore label from Boston uh, lines up really well with how the first phase of the band was, signing to Hydrahead. So it felt like there's a sort of homecoming element to it as well.
That's pretty cool. I'm not familiar with them. I'm familiar with Cloakroom, but mainly just they toured with you guys a few years ago, I think, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I think I saw them for the first time, and I think at that point, I probably picked up the Relapse record because I thought they were actually really good when I saw them with Pelican. Um,
Yeah, they're fucking awesome.
yeah, no, really, really good. Pretty
Yeah,
much right up my alley, definitely.
I'll say, one thing real quick, and that's like the camaraderie and like relationship um building element of being a part of music and making music together is like important to us as members of the band that relate to each other, but also into like the community that we're tethered to. And to be able to have like a label that you vibe with and can then talk about music with, and then when you hang out, you're like into similar things, or if you're not, you're curious about why they're into it. Like, when we did an event in Chicago, like a pre-listening party, and two of the label people that we work with flew out and hung out, and just getting to be around them and talk about music and go to record stores together and just sharing some laughs was awesome. And it reminded me of why we're here in the first place, which is just to do cool things together, even as we ideally gracefully age our way into oblivion.
That's really cool because I know on a personal level too, like that sometimes gets lost. Like if you when you work with bigger labels, it becomes more about like the idea that maybe what you're producing is like product or something to them, you know what I
Mm.
mean? And it's, you know, you meet with people that you don't really have a whole lot in common with sometimes. And yeah, it's definitely it must be nice to get back to that feeling of you know, coming from the same place really in a lot of ways. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I know that part of Jeff's come up, Jeff who started the label, part of his come up was coming up in Boston during that era with ISIS and Converge and Cave In. So like his foundation is almost his roots are almost like in that Hydrahead scene that we ended up being a part of. So I feel like he's got a very holistic understanding of where we're coming from and where we're going.
I wonder if I know this guy, Jeff. Interesting.
You very well may.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people from, I lived in Boston for a number of years, right around that time, actually, you
Hmm.
know, late 90s. So before we started, Trevor, we were talking about writing and, you know, was the writing process for this record different than the previous record? Or that record, I feel, that came out a couple of years ago, Nighttime Stories.
Six now, 6
Wait,
years
how,
ago.
6 years ago? Wait, hold on a second.
Yeah, well, there was a pandemic. I don't know if
Oh
you would
my
count those 2 years.
Good Lord, you're right. 6 years ago. I'm looking at my notes over here. I'm like, yeah, it came out like last year or 2 years ago. Wow. Okay. 6 years. Oh, Madonna me. Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. So 6 years. So that, wow.
So yes, the writing process changed because that
Okay.
record itself took 6 years to write, or rather, there was 6 years between that and the previous record. I think now the writing is moving a lot quicker, so we're closing the gap on that. Yeah,
Now,
knock on wood.
one of the trends to sort of develop from the pandemic was, you know, everyone became like a bedroom solo artist with their writing style, you know, like writing riffs into you know with some sort of drum machine or program and you know collaborating remotely and like all this stuff which is great, you know, it's for certain people that works, you know. uh, was any of that prevalent in creating this record, or was this more of like a down in the jam room kind of vibe? I mean, you guys have been playing together for 20 something years, so there must be a great chemistry when it comes to writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, are actively working on little things on our own, and there's a couple ways in which songs came together, but certainly like when, for example, like I would bring things to the space and show Trevor and Brian principally because all three of us live in Chicago. Um, we always, end up largely structuring the songs and their sort of like dynamic flow and their like the themes together. And then, what Trevor might end up doing then informs something that I want to be doing. So, whereas we start with like a sort of a skeleton here and there or like a bass part from Brian, I might go home with that bass line in mind and then come back and go, hey, this actually like Wandering Mind's a good example. He had like a main bass line and he was like, I've got this bass line. And there was one like night that Trevor wasn't there and we wrote a couple things together. Then Trevor came in the mix and we just wrote the whole thing, and showed it to Larry. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about it. But I would say there's nothing happening individually that then gets sent to people who
Okay.
then do their thing at home. Like we will, send sketches of songs to Larry so that when he flies back, there's some bones to work on. But the nut of what we do is for sure the interactive element of us being in the room. I can't feel the song until we're all together. I think that's a common thread that we all share.
Yeah,
Even
so
Brian, even Brian is hesitant to go beyond like basics on bass lines until his brother comes back. Like he'll go, I'll just put some root notes here, but he's not really he's not really locking in a fluidity to the part until he hears what the drums are accenting and so on.
yeah, I mean that makes sense with the rhythm section, you know, locking in that way
Yeah.
for sure.
it's not like ground up from nothing improvisational in this band. There are, moments that where that does happen. I
Yeah.
mean, just the other day, Trevor and I were together, and he was like, "We need a riff here, like a riff that takes us from this place to that place." And then, half hour later, he had something to connect, whether it would be the permanent riff or not, unsure. But in the moment, it got us to the next place and started to allow the song to make sense because we're already starting to work on new stuff, which is cool. So go ahead, Trevor.
There's no jamming in the actual songs when they're done, but there is like we utilize improvisation and jamming to try and make sections turn out the way they do is kind of the way it works, I guess. And like there's certainly times where we're just fucking around in the space and something somebody is playing activates somebody else and then that activates another person and then suddenly you've got like a song starts to take
Yeah,
shape right in front of you.
Yeah, that's it's some of well, in my own writing, some of my favorite parts are the ones that are like you think you have a song written and then you come to the practice space and it's like we need another part. Let's come up with something. And then that is where the chemistry of the band really comes to the forefront. And there's like a material that I've written myself. Some of my favorite parts are the ones that it sounded great when I'm at home in front of my computer, and then when I come to the space, there's something missing. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
let's think about what we're doing here, or maybe let's not think about what we're doing here, and just sort of flow with the song, and then the piece writes itself out of the ether. You know what I mean? And it's those are some of the more satisfying things that sort of like galvanizes the idea that we're actually a band. We're not just like writing stuff like individually, and I'm telling you what to do and you what to do, and I like that. That's a really cool process.
I mean, speaking for myself, like I probably since Forever Becoming, I haven't really been able to write songs at home. That was like the last record where I was still writing at home. And now my creativity is really activated by being in a room with people. Like I've written like riffs here and there, but if I'm not in a room with other musicians, vibing off of what they're doing, I'm just not able to come up with stuff. Um, but I mean, that said, when I'm in that environment, I'm like hyper activated and I tend to work fast. Laurent at practice the other day said, I don't understand where you come up with this stuff. I
yeah.
don't remember how you phrased it, but it was something like I can't write the way you write. And it's like, well, I can't write the way you write. Like Laurent sits at home playing guitar and coming up with riffs, and I just can't do that.
It ends up being it's really just like it was in the early days. We sort of we get together and there's just a freedom there and like a back and forth dialogue that's just like zipping along like unhindered. And whereas I think in the past I may have been like, well, I actually really like that riff. I don't know why he doesn't like it. Like, I'm gonna try to bring it back 2 weeks from now and maybe change your note and see what happens. Uh, now it's like I'm way more just open to the to the criticism and the end process of all the building blocks really working together more architecturally. And yeah, I do tend to come up with things, but they're also very like me sounding things. So they sound good in my head, and then when we get there, they do need a little bit of like um unpacking. I sometimes feel like a mad scientist with his like hair like all the way out going like, check out this creation. It's perfect. And it's like, well, we kind of need
Well,
like
you're not the only mad scientist because then I come in the mix and I'm like, why are you playing that four times? Like it doesn't it make sense to change after three and a half?
there's
But
but that's the joy of it. And it's like and there's no it's great because then we'll send it to Larry and he just when he hears it he'll hear it even clean in a room like just like a recording off a phone. And then he'll know the kind of stuff that the song needs, and we'll write back and go, how'd you know? You just knew that that was going to be like this kind of part or that kind of part. And that's what being together for 20 years will do. But you can dig your heels in even and be that type of band and go, well, but I think then you get stuck. And there's some moments of getting stuck in the past on things, you know. Now I'm trying to like not be that. I'm trying to just be in service of what the band needs in the moment, which is more of a collectivist realization.
That's a very, very difficult place to arrive at for a lot of people, which is admirable because I mean, you know, being too connected or too attached to the parts, you know, is like even as like I've been trying to do some writing as well as like, you know, like fiction, you know, so
Oh, cool.
working with an editor, you know, you're like, you know, this part where you describe this one thing for like 6 pages, like you need to edit that down to like a paragraph, basically. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yep.
yeah, it's great. You know, it's cool. But you know, we don't need to hear about that anymore. So not, I think that has helped me actually become very unattached to some of the songwriting stuff I do, you know, either riffs or lyrics, but it's difficult, a difficult place to arrive at. And it takes a long time. And I think like, you know, younger musicians have a hard time realizing that not you shouldn't you should be unattached to the things that you write because like especially if you're writing in a collective because it's not about like your particular piece. It's about how everything works together in a system, you know.
Yeah, that is so
Totally.
true. I mean, it is a, you know, it's an environment and it thrives with different factors being considerations and like, you know, the Pelican terrarium isn't going to be like propelled by only, you know, only by certain types of riffs. Like it has all sorts of elements, especially if the end goal is for the four people or however many to enjoy playing the song so that it has like a life beyond that particular moment. And that goes with like, you know, even some of the songs on Flickering Resonance, you know, everybody kind of got attached to certain songs for a variety of reasons. And I remember thinking like, why isn't anybody attached as much as I am to this one? Wait a minute, I thought this was the best song. And then you know, and then you start to worry. You're like, oh my God, what if this song doesn't make it on the record? I don't know what I'm gonna do. You know, because we wrote like, you know, an excess amount of stuff. But it's a cool exercise because even then, when you are deciding what to play live, you do some of the songs at first, and you're like, I'm gonna have to table that for a while because it's just not sounding as good live as we want to. And you know, it's best to not overthink these things, especially when you're further into the career, because like the song may have another life down the line. You never know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
and I
sure
feel like
things sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
those conversations were a lot more emotionally fraught when we were in our 20s and even in our 30s. It's like telling somebody like, "Hey, don't do that part, it doesn't fit," would have erupted in like some bruised egos. And now I think we've all kind of arrived at a place where we're able to let go of our egos a little bit and see it through for the collective, the collective good.
Yeah, that's just once again to underscore that. It's a difficult. I mean, it sounds all you know great when you're talking about it in semantic terms, and you know, but anyone out there who's listening, I know a bunch of people that listen to this show are actively doing bands and writing music and everything, and I think that's like definitely a goal to arrive at in your career as a songwriter to not be like attached to the things that you write. You know, to be more like able to let go of certain things for the
It, it
betterment of
Yeah.
everything.
it's tough to say as a musician, like, hey, you should really let your ego dissolve so that you can arrive at a transcendent, you know, music moment. But as a general call to like how to experience life, things happen to you and you happen to things. Your ego helps you navigate, you know, what's best for you and not best for you. Like it gives you a sense of guidance and fulfillment, but at some point it can also get in the way of really enjoying things. And I constantly have to be reminded by my wife, like when I, you know, I'll come home and go, oh yeah, this was okay. She's like, you are in a band and you're 47 and you're putting out records. So just let it sink in, you know, and this is like when I'm just dealing with shit at work or whatever, you know, it's like you also have this wonderful thing that you get to do, which is to be creative. So don't let that also become you know, some sort of stressor. And sometimes it's easier said than done, but I am really I think especially since this is like a coming back to this band, it's you write about talk about writing fiction. A couple of interviews we did, I was like, I sort of imagined myself as like a character that just, the door opens and people are like, "Oh my God, he's back." It's like, Hello, I'm back." But yeah, but to be back in a narrative that was a narrative that you were out of, however that may have come about, is like an interesting thing. And I don't want to. I want to try to learn from past, complications and setbacks, and be like, well, what is something that I can bring now that I couldn't bring then? And that's a part of that narrative for me, is like, how can I show up at the space and like to be generous with ideas, but to also be open to receiving people's perspectives on those ideas, and to know that we're all trying to get to a common goal, which is a good song.
I got a couple favorites on the record actually. Let me see if
Cool.
they align with
No, that one that one sucks.
It's time to judge the children.
No, dude, no, the ones like I just like I think I shared with you the Wandering Mind. I think the final track is like, that's
Yeah, it's
probably
a
my
fun
favorite.
one.
Yeah, I like the clean guitar work in there. I think that's really cool. And Indelible, I think, is a really good song as well. So I like to pick two songs out of every brand new record I listen to, and I'm like, okay, these are the two that I'm really stoked on. But the rest of the record is really great too.
Thank you. Yeah, we those are, I think those two songs especially are good representations of newness. Like I think they sound like us, but they also hint at something a little different, which is always the idea.
I also feel like they kind of display the bandwidth of sort of emotions on the record too. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like there's you kind of get the extremes of what is being expressed on the record if you sample those two songs, I think. But yeah, anyway, great songs. A lot of that material, I'm sure, is being and going to be performed on your touring, right? Because you've started some of the touring for this record, right?
Yeah, we just did 3 weeks with Russian Circles out west. And I think without fail, we played those two songs every night.
Yeah,
Cool,
pretty much.
awesome. Yeah. Did you guys
Yeah,
go to Europe too
Wandering Mind,
recently?
that ooh, not yet. We're going in August. We're doing
Okay,
Moto Culture, Arctangent, Brutal Assault, and Void
hmm,
Festival, and then like four headline dates as well.
nice. It's killer.
But what I was gonna say is like, yeah, on that topic of being open to other ideas, it was like I wasn't sure that Wandering Mind was a song that would work as a live song.
Hmm.
Particularly on a tour like Russian Circles, where we're like opening or whatever, and then like, that is so clearly a closing song. So when we played it at the end of the set, and I was like, you know what? I bet you this will work in certain shows. Like some of the shows are smaller and more intimate, some of them are bigger, and I was like, I don't think that this is going to work at a bigger show, so we shouldn't do it. And there was some back and forth about it, and everybody was like, basically, Trevor, you're wrong. And then we tried it, and it was like, no, actually, this works every fucking night.
Yeah. No, I think like playing at a bigger venue with that track because you have a better sound system. I feel like, the dynamics on the song are expressed if you have a better audio presentation. You know what I mean?
For sure. I think my concern was like you get a bunch of people in a room and then you get quiet, like people will get distracted and start talking and shit like that. But I mean the crowds that came out for that tour, for that package, were more attuned to that aesthetic, I think. And
Well,
it
yeah.
happened to work.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you're going to see Pelican and Russian Circles, you know what the score is. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
not like you guys are playing with like Murphy's Law and like,
sign me up.
like 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 something like, you know what I mean? It's like it's not like
Yeah.
what the story is if you go to that show for sure.
Yeah.
And the US tour that's bringing you guys out east, that's in July, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And what's the territories that you're going to be hitting during that?
Well, let's see here. We're doing Cleveland, Detroit, DC, New York, Boston. Toronto, Montreal, Grand Rapids, Indianapolis, and Chicago.
Cool. I will be at the New York show.
You're not coming to all of them?
I would, Trevor, but I got to make a living over here.
Yeah, I understand.
Imagine if I, was like sort of this traveling Pelican fan.
We're
I've been
waiting for
waiting.
any of those.
Yeah, I've been waiting for one. If you're out there,
Um, so that tour, who's going out with you guys on that?
Por-
Who's support on that?
Porcelain. Porcelain is a band out of Austin that came into our radar from just really checking them out on on Bandcamp via the label that I think is helmed by the Portrayal of Guilt people.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you hear it, it like has immediate like unwound kind of kerosene 454 fireside aesthetic. And I remember sharing it. We shared it with each other, and it was one of those rare moments where like all four of us were like, yes, what a great band. So we listened to them and a bunch, and then when we were thinking about and got to meet one of the members too, but when we started thinking about who to go out with, it was like that's the band, one of the bands that we wanted to do it with, and I think it's going to be great. I really think they're going to go over super well, and it's a good fit. It's a good fit for us. They just did some dates with Young Widows, and they previously did a tour with Chad Pyle, and so they're making the rounds. They're really hitting the road pretty hard, and it's really a band worth checking out.
Yeah, I checked them out after I saw that they were on the
Oh, cool.
schedule with you guys. Yeah, they're definitely. Yeah, it's funny. I've been sort of I've been on this big Girls Against Boys kick lately.
Excellent
Nice.
A
stuff.
band that I haven't listened to in decades until I spoke with Ryan Patterson actually
Oh,
a
okay.
couple months ago, and he kind of got me started on that tip again. So I'm definitely feeling those like late '90s vibes.
Yeah, that's a Patterson move for sure, right there. That whole era for sure. I feel like every time I see them in Louisville, like without fail, within a month or two, I'm like, I probably should revisit a lot of that Louisville stuff.
Oh yeah,
And then I'm just like, I'm digging into like my shipping news, and then it's like I'm gonna go listen to Crown Hate Ruin, and then I'm like, oh my God, what did and then it's Hoover, and then like it's just all the old stuff starts to come back, and then you sort of realize like, man, we had it good. We really
Yeah,
had it
those
good
it's a
back
those
deep.
were
then.
That's a
definitely
deep
good
well.
years. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely good years for sure. So you guys are both married, right?
Yeah,
affirmative.
to
So
each
how,
other.
well, yeah. How, in a sense, you guys are, since,
Yeah.
doing this
Yeah,
band thing is like being married sometimes, with people. Um, so how has the family dynamic colored or influenced your creativity or being on tour or that sort of, how do you balance all that stuff out?
Well, it colored my departure because in the beginning, I really wanted um, I wanted to be a father, and in starting to do that, the first few years I was still in the band. I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna make this work. I just had sort of concerns with like revenue, like everybody else, and then just kind of being gone and feeling like I wasn't gonna be able to turn stuff down, and um, I just didn't have like the footing of maturity that I think one needs to have to be able to hold all the balls in the air and go, I can have all these things. I can make it all work. It was more of like a all in or else, which was what I did with the band too. It was like all in, we're in a band, we're just doing this. Um, but I had I had then, and I've always had a very supportive partner. And when my kids were older, I have two. When my oldest son was older, he would just start to ask questions about the band. And eventually, when my equipment came back from the space, he was like, how does this work? Like, he wanted to see pedals working and all this stuff. And it just kind of got me into that headspace of wanting to be creative again. And then it wasn't before long that a lot of like feelings I hadn't really processed, started to get kind of unpacked. And my wife's a therapist, so she doubled down on me like processing that stuff and was like, you need to figure out like why that went down the way that it did, and move on or do something or whatever. And then right in that sort of um, moment in my life, this was a couple years ago when I, rejoined to do those shows at the time. So it all worked out. And that's one of the reasons I want to come back and bring a different energy. But like to have kids who are like are aware of, what you do and see you be creative and, see you take time for yourself, going like it's Tuesday night, I'm going to the practice space. I think they're important things for young people to see, like adults who aren't ideally just being ground down forever in service of just the capitalism machine. And still like, doing things like balancing, I run 3 bars. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of hours. It's always been weird hours. That's always been a part of the dynamic. And it was for tour too. So it wasn't that different. But just to be able to juggle that with still continuing to put effort into being creative is, I think, a really cool thing to be able to do as a family member. Now it's not, the same availability in terms of time as it used to be, especially the job part, and being able to leave for like multiple months on end. You do want to be around, your kids and you want to see shit happen. So, but it's a very it's an interesting part of what we do now. I think it really informs the music, maybe not in a direct way, but of course it informs it. You're approaching writing music as a person that's lived like a life that's filled with different things, parenthood being one of them.
Yeah, that's I mean, a lot of the people that listen to this know that I'm getting married in June next month. So
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
congratulations.
congratulations.
yeah. So few weeks from now, few short weeks. So yeah, I'm dealing with a lot of the same sort of concepts, you know.
This is
Um,
our marriage gift to you, this conversation. This is
hell yeah, man.
this
No, this
is
is
our
great. No, I've always like been fascinated by that because for most of my life I haven't had those sorts of you know, items in my life that made me want to
Mhm.
stay home and be involved and stuff like that. So it's a new thing for me, which is really cool. Trevor, what
I
about
think
you?
for
I'm sorry.
I think for Laurent and myself, like both of our partners were with us when Pelican started. So it's not like any adjustment period. It was they have always known that this band was part of our lives, and the parenthood thing is more of the new element that we have to try and figure out how to balance. Um, and I don't have anything insightful or emotional to add to what Laurent already said, but on more of a flippant tip, I do think that tour managing sets you up well for parenting, and then parenting sets you up well for tour managing to follow. It's the same shit. You're just hurting people. Try to make
Yeah.
everybody happy. Try to make sure everything's copacetic. You know,
And you've got your people that are repeatedly early to lobby call, and those that are just always going to be 3 minutes behind. It doesn't
Oh,
matter
yes,
who it
dude.
is.
and you need to remember which ones are going to be 3 minutes behind and start reminding them earlier every day, or
Yeah.
lying about what time lobby call is. I hope
Oh,
Larry
yeah.
knows.
Yeah, totally. I've had to do that before for sure, man. Like, like there's always those guys who will sleep like till the very, very, very last minute. Everyone's ready to
Oh
go.
yeah,
And this dude's like just taking a shower. You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, guys, let's go. Now we're into that envelope of time we need to be on the road, that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
that doesn't change.
Yeah. Yeah,
I, I
that's
was I
interesting.
and just to throw myself under the bus, I was late for lobby call one day on the Russian Circles tour, and so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the one day that really ruined the tour, and you know.
I well, I'm still carrying a guilty conscience about it, which I think says something.
That was the one day that counted.
Every day counts, Mike.
Yeah. So what kind of, I have had this revelation recently about equipment. Okay. Are you guys playing amps still? Or
Yes.
are you using these
Yes.
these
So,
modelers? Tell
yeah.
me, tell me about what kind of rigs you guys are playing through now.
I play out of a Model T and the same Emperor 4x12 that I've had forever. I'm not a gear guy though, so I can't tell you much about my Model T. I know it's like probably 70s or something like that.
Yeah, it's the second era Model T, which
There we go.
Yeah.
has the mid switch, which is actually a wonderful tool that uh, it also shows up on those V4s. You know, you can sculpt your mids across different frequency spectrums, which is an awesome tool to have. And these days probably lives on a preamp pedal for a lot of people, but to have it coming out of the power amp, sorry, the valve section is pretty awesome. So it's a great amp. Trevor has great sound.
Yeah, I mean, Pelican is known for their tone, really. Except that apparently Trevor is more like an idiot savant when it comes to his tones.
Yeah.
I mean, for years I played out of that Mesa triple rectifier, and if we were known for tone during that era, it wasn't because of me.
Well,
You know,
it was coloring the other parts of the tone.
I
It
don't
was
love those, man. I got to be honest.
no, it was very shrill, and it wasn't working. But I look back on those years with regret, and I'm in a better place now because I have my Model T.
My transitions were weird. If maybe not weird for me, but I started with a Sun 2000S, which was really like very loud and very bare bones. And then I got the Model T, and that was used for years. But then I sort of around City of Echoes, I wanted a Marshall sound. Can't quite remember what the move was there or for what reason, but
I think
it's
what it
what
was, Laurent, honestly, not to step
well
on you, but
you'd remember more than me.
we at some point we started renting, or because we were doing fly-in dates, we
Ah,
were getting a lot of the amps that we were being offered were Marshalls, and I think we figured out how to dial in a
yeah.
Marshall JCM 900 to our sound, to the extent that it was like, oh, I know how to get this to sound the way we want it to sound. And if this is an amp that's easy to get when we do fly-in dates, then maybe we should just consistently use that amp across the board.
Yeah, and I did, and I really enjoyed it for years. And it was the last thing I played until I stopped. And when I came back, I hadn't played for a long time. I did the first few things coming back to the band playing a V4, which honestly was a move I made based on watching Trevor a few times live when I wasn't in the band. I was like, wow, that sounds great. So I played a V4 and then got into my head that I wanted to try an orange. And then that's what I've been playing for a few years now. I play the Rock Reverb, their 100 watt, valve amp.
Yeah,
And I just, it has a sound that like is a sound I hear in my head a lot for what we do. It's very much like one sound, but it's frequently the sound that I want.
yeah.
Um, and so it works. And when we did this record, actually, I remember bringing it along with a host of other things. I hadn't done a record in a long time, and I was like, I don't know if that's gonna work. So we tried a bunch of stuff, and then both Trevor and Sanford were like, you need to record the orange because that's the one that sounds the best, and it's also the one you play live. So just do that, because
To be fair, I did the same thing. I mean, I
yeah,
went through a bunch of amps too, and I ended up on the Model T most of the time. So,
so.
it's like,
But what we did, speaking of the triple rec, is at least on my tracks, I was doing a triple rec with actually it was a dual. It was a dual rectifier alongside the orange, with the orange doing the majority of the work, and then dialing in some of the frequencies that were maybe like not missing, but weren't as weren't represented as well by the orange, using the dual, and then and that's the thing about like recording these days is just kind of like wow, the things you can really do in the studio, just the setups you can have and stuff. But the whole record, like the other records, was done with amps in a closed room, loud as hell, with a bunch of mics in front of them, and heads with glowing tubes.
Oh, so you
It
guys
was
recorded the actual, you didn't take like direct signals and then reamp and stuff like that, or
they were there, but we didn't really do too much reamping.
I don't think we did anything with the reamp. We definitely did direct signal, but I don't think we did anything with any of that.
yeah, that's cool. That's
It was
good.
kind of like
So
it was like a just in case, just
yeah,
as a backup, we'll get the direct signal in case we need to reamp stuff, and we didn't use it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's like the old school way. I'd be lying if I said that that's how we do it, but but I love that though. I love that you just capture a sound and you roll with it. That's like the satisfying. Um,
I think much like how my earplugs are never all the way in, there is just like I just need to feel the music in a particular way to like oh, to sort of transition into that like right part of my brain where I'm flowing with the music. I can't, I get too, I'm too left-brained otherwise. Like it doesn't work for me. Like I can't just play. I have to feel it in a particular
sure.
way to kind of transition. And um until like a certain volume, and I'm not trying to be absurd about it, it's like it's just like the lighting the right candle or whatever. Like it has to be a particular way to be transportive. And I think if we were playing shows, and it was always that way, it wasn't like, of course, in the beginning we were like obnoxiously loud at times, and that was enjoyable in and of itself. And it stopped being enjoyable when the songs got more complex, and we were just like losing each other, But now it's like the a perfect middle of like we're all way more versed into how to handle the stage, how to get a better mix, how to work with monitors. You're asking the right questions, you're focusing on the things you need to hear in your wedge, that are going to be helpful to you, and then you can reach volume heights that are going to be manageable, but are going to get you to that like, those heights that you want to reach for whatever reason that is. But we're still, informed by experience, but by and large the same band, I think, in so many ways.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, it's an interesting thing with you know, particularly music, particularly extreme music, where it's not just an intellectual sort of technical pursuit, but there's also this kind of visceral element, like you were describing, where you have to feel something as opposed to just executing something in a technical sense.
Yeah,
Well, that's great, guys. Thank you for joining me this evening. And once
it's a
again,
pleasure.
congratulations with the new record. And I will be seeing you guys in July. I'm looking forward to catching you guys live and maybe catching up with you guys in a hangout or something like that.
I would love that.
It sounds fun. Yeah. Hell yeah.
All right, guys, have a good evening.
You
You
do
as
too.
well.
Take care now.